Well, before we get to all that, I mean, we have to talk about this leaked Supreme Court opinion that is making it seem like it's very, very likely that in the next few weeks, for many people, including people in my home state of Texas, the right, and it is a right, to get access to healthcare and to have an abortion is severely, severely under threat. And obviously there's a lot that's been said about it so far, and I think a lot of us are sort of processing the shock and the fear. And I mean, I'm with y'all with that. I mean, it's absolutely a frightening moment, a moment that we always hoped would never come. But because of the game that we've seen from liberals for decades, has always left this door open for a far right deranged movement that is in power today to be able to follow through on undermining human rights in this country in a really dastardly and devastating way. Um, I mean, we got a lot we want to talk about. We're going to talk about the court, but I think maybe let's just start here. I wanted to remind folks that this has been a sword that has been put over our heads for decades. And yes, there has not always been the opportunity for federal action, but there has been plenty of opportunity for federal action on codifying a Roe v. Wade, making sure that abortion would never be under threat. And this kind of constant kind of pull left and right that we've been sort of living under, and it has been extremely consequential and devastating for millions and millions of people around this country. That they could have avoided this whole thing by settling this question once and for all. And we'll get into some of the things that could be done. We'll talk about the court. We'll talk about some immediate things. But let's talk about the immediate thing that could be done. Well, actually, sorry, before we get there, Matt, if you could put up this fundraiser right quick for folks.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to say right now, because in the aftermath of this, you've seen a lot of people asking for money. And I highly suggest that people, if you are going to be, putting money out there, and I think it's something that you definitely should do, find ways to donate money to organizations that have been making sure that people are able to receive abortions. Those are the people who have been on the front lines this whole time. Those are the people who know what to do. And those are the people who are going to use those resources to the best of their ability. You're seeing a lot of Democrats have loved to fundraise off of this, and they've fundraised millions of dollars off of this over the past few decades. And this can't just be something that is allowing them to fill up their coffers until they start taking seriously their responsibility to take action on this. So this is a local one here in Austin. There's a link in the show notes on YouTube if people want to find a way to donate there. But I know across the country, DSA chapters and abortion organizations have been asking for funds. And I highly suggest if you're going to be, giving money out in this moment, that those are the organizations that you're giving them out to. So just a quick plug to start, but let's get to what we should be doing about this. If we could get this Bernie line up here, because I think it lays it out rather clearly what can and should be done while the Democratic Party controls the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Bernie Sanders said Congress must pass legislation that codifies Roe v. Wade as the law of the land in this country now. And if there aren't 60 votes in the Senate to do it, and there are not, we must end the filibuster to pass it with 50 votes. That's it. That's the game. It's as simple as that. There's a fight that has to be that must be done to achieve that, but that is the game plan in the immediate future for what needs to happen. And remember, Bernie has in the past been hesitant on ending the filibuster. This is somebody who recognizes that the situation is changing, it's dire, and something needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. The same cannot be said for the sitting president of the United States of America. Here is Joe Biden in the aftermath of this leaked rule opinion here. This is what he had to say on the matter.
Mr. President, can you do away with the filibuster to codify Roe?
I'm not prepared to make those judgments now about, but I think the codification of Roe makes a lot of sense. Look, think what Roe says. Roe says what all basic mainstream religions have historically concluded, that the existence of a human life and being is a question. Is it at the moment of conception? Is it 6 months? Is it 6 weeks? Is it quickening, like Aquinas argued? I mean, so the idea that we're going to make a judgment that is going to say that no one can make the judgment to choose to abort a child based on a decision by the Supreme Court, I think goes way overboard.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Overboard. He was a lifeguard, so.
I mean, that is pathetic. That is absolutely pathetic in a moment like this to not have a thought out plan. They knew. Give me a break. This was the whole threat that was being put forward by the Democratic Party in the 2020 election, that you got to rally behind Sleepy Joe. You got to rally behind these folks because the threats are too big and we need somebody who has the political skills and the political knowledge and the ability to respond to them. This is a guy who's spent his life in the Senate, right, is supposed to be the expert on how to get things done there, having no plan other than, I mean, it's not even rhetoric at this point, what he was saying right there. I mean, that was like mad-libbing through a 1-minute spot on one of the most consequential things that has happened politically in the past couple of years, right? I mean, that is an absolute joke. And the Democratic Party should be ashamed of the situation that we're in right now. I mean, let me take, unless you had anything you want to add to that, Matt, like...
Well, only in the sense that like they're not ashamed. I mean, we have this clip here of Jim Clyburn, House Majority Whip, says that when he calls Representative Henry Cuellar his friend, he really means it. He praises Cuellar for building bridges rather than hurling insults or avoiding colleagues. Cuellar is anti-abortion. And this is today, Jim Clyburn campaigning with him. One other note on that. So it is Cisneros, Jessica Cisneros, which is the opponent to Cuellar, calls on Dem leadership to withdraw support from opponent, the last anti-choice Democrat in the House. Cuellar has been endorsed by Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, and Hakeem Jeffries. And I just want to like make special note of Hakeem Jeffries because he's 51, so I think he's a couple decades younger than the other people on that list. But he's being groomed, which is a word that's harder and harder to say these days. But he is being groomed for leadership by these old folks to continue the exact same sort of fecklessness and inaction and cynical fundraising on actual life and death issues that has got us in the position in the first place. Mm-hmm. So Hakeem Jeffries, like, there's going to be a plenty of focus on Pelosi and Clyburn, which is fair enough. That like people should hate them and learn to be politically educated through like their limitations. But also, I just want people to understand Hakeem Jeffries is like this party is it's rotten at the head, and the leadership is just rotten. But like there's this idea that these folks will die off, and actually no, they are cultivating the next sort of round of corporate Democrats.
People who are very comfortable with maintaining the status quo. I mean, we say this time and time on this program. And I mean, let me just be absolutely crystal clear here, because I know some people will say, well, why are you talking about the Republicans? What is there to say about them? That is a minority party that believes in minoritarian government. They're not people who are very interested in the fact that the vast majority of people in this country, despite how polarizing it is politically, the vast majority of people in this country want to ensure that people have access to an abortion. That is actually not as controversial as our politicians make it out to be seen. Yeah. Right? There are debates as to terms and things like that. And we should fight them on that. But the vast majority of people in this country do not think that this is something that the right to an abortion needs to be restricted. That is a very far right, small portion, but a very vocal and a very powerful and a very well organized part of the right wing. But of course, the right wing is willing to play that game. We know this. Right. So why am I'm seething mad at those people. I think that they're pigs. I think it's disgusting. But I'm even more mad at the people who ostensibly are supposed to be there to support these things. Like we're not even talking about the big game here about, dealing with, capitalism and worker exploitation and those questions. Right. We're talking about just very, very basic, human rights in 2022 in the United States. Right. I'm furious at the people who are leading the assault against it. And I'm even more furious at the people who are supposed to be playing defense, who are sitting on their asses right now. Well, I mean, let's just talk about this for a second before we get to the real elephant in the room, which is the Supreme Court, the anti-democratic relic that continues to poison the system, um, seemingly on a yearly basis now. Um, I mean, let's just talk in like recent memory. Barack Obama gets elected president. We talked about this, last week with Luke Savage, um, about the kind of historic moment that he came into power with. Right, controlled the House, controlled the Senate, came in with extreme popularity as the country was crumbling during the financial crisis. Had a lot of ability to basically be able to bring and reshape this country in a much different direction. And all we saw was compromise and retreat from Barack Obama, from everything from dealing with the bankers, from helping out the people who lost their homes, to doing something on healthcare. I mean, Obamacare is a complete retreat and acceptance of the prerogatives and dreams of the insurance industry. To the most basic question in American politics is something that every person who runs for office has to answer. What is their position on Roe v. Wade? What is their position on abortion? And Obama, when he ran, took a very strong position, saying if he gets elected, he would codify Roe v. Wade. That's a much better situation in the Senate. That's a much better situation politically than we have today. And still, they didn't do it. In 2009, they held the presidency, they held Congress, and it seemed like Obama was ready to go. He promised that the first thing that he would do as president would be to sign the Freedom of Choice Act. But then when he gets into office, it slowly started to sink down his legislative priority. So I don't want to hear people talk about Jill Stein or Hillary Clinton losing in 2016. There was an opportunity there with the mandate, with the position, and with the capability to do it, and they didn't do it. It started way before then, but that's something in our lifetime. That's something only a few decades away now. What, 12 years, 13 years away from us? A golden opportunity to finally settle this, and they didn't take it. I don't want to hear shit about kind of electoral fantasies as to what could have happened. They were in power and they didn't do it, right? We just talked about Cuellar, the fact that Nancy Pelosi and the party right now, who again love to fundraise on abortion rights, at every moment are willing to shut down and try to kick out progressives from the party so that they can maintain relationships with corrupt, oil-loving guys like Henry Cuellar. Remember, Henry Cuellar was the only Democrat in the House to vote against the most recent attempt in the House to codify Roe v. Wade into law. Why, if this is the most important fight of our lifetimes, if 2022 is the most important election, that we're going to be facing, why is the Democratic Party, as Matt just showed this photograph, flying out to Texas to support somebody who doesn't support the basic legislative principles of the Democratic Party?
Corruption, I think, is the answer to that.
It's absolute joke. You want to put up this lever thing? Sorry, yeah.
Well, I want to make one note on like the failure of leadership of the Democrats, because I don't think it can be under stressed, and particularly right now when like they need to fight or they need to lose massively, and not just lose an election, lose people's faith for a generation, because they have been cynically, and we talked about this with Robin, cynically fundraising on all this stuff and to send out very in rhetoric that emails that meet the moment of how serious this is, but also this entire generation never truly, like you talk about Biden, the number of politicians who can't actually say the word abortion in a positive sentence.
Yeah.
And that is contributed as much as, I mean, look, like the right wing has organized massively on this, but the failure of the Democratic Party to come out and make a winning issue a winning issue, and instead constantly like be sort of gross and turned off and sort of feel inconvenienced by it until it's time to turn out the female vote. It's a massive failure. And now the moment is like, if you want to be worth a shit as a Democrat, is to understand that and work on doing something else, basically.
No, yeah, and they want to fundraise off of it. And I'll just note again for people who are joining us, there's a link in the show notes to fund abortions here, abortion fund here in Texas. that is a much better use of your money than supporting the Democratic Party if they're going to be flying out here to support Henry Cuellar. Absolute joke. Before we move on, and look, I think we'll probably, I mean, we have to, and we certainly will happily be doing more on some of the concrete things that can be done immediately. We opened up saying that Bernie needs to show up. I mean, so people need to follow the Bernie plan and codify Roe v. Wade into law and abolish the filibuster if that needs to be done to do so, which it looks like it needs to be the case. Biden needs to get a backbone and stand up for that position. But there are also things that can be done in the meantime. If you could pull up this Lever article real quick, I just want to know. Yep. There's a very specific thing that Biden could do today, this afternoon, right? Give him a call and tell him to do this. Less controversially, this is from the piece in the Lever, the Roe disaster and what to do about it. They break down the history of how we got here. They break down the right-wing money. It's a very good piece, and they break down some very concrete things that states can do. There's going to be a lot of rules that states are going to need to be doing, to protect this right. And two, some things that the government could be doing immediately. So this is from the piece. Less controversially, Biden could use the powers of the Food and Drug Administration to ensure access to the so-called abortion pill. He could do so by seeking to preempt state regulations that limit access to the pill, since drug approval is the FDA's sole domain. That's it. Use the power that you were elected to make sure that people don't have these things taken away from them. Use the full power of the federal government, to, like, if Biden were doing other things, I would still be pissed at him, but I would cut him a little bit of slack, right? Because the fight to codify it, because of the corrupt people like Sinema and Manchin, it's going to be a fight. But the fact is that he's not even doing the kind of bare minimum things he could do today, other than saying, well, 2022 is going to be a very important election, which is basically what we've gotten for the National Democratic Party at this point. But I highly suggest people read that article if they want to get a full understanding of some of the things that could be done immediately.
Yeah.
Well, lastly, I mean, this is not a small matter. We're going to spend some time on this because this is important. Why are we here? Because the Council of Elders, the unelected Council of Elders in this system, the most absurd relic, anti-democratic relic that we still have today, and they affect everything from abortion rights to our basic civil liberties to our electoral rights. The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was always set up to be a check on democracy. It was a fear of everyday people. It was the fear of you and me that they created a system that allowed so much power to reside in the Supreme Court. And remember that this power was also taken. The Supreme Court took the power for judicial review. They have asserted the power time and time again, so that very many people in this country believe that the Supreme Court is the highest office, right? It is the end all be all. And there's no reason that should be the case. There's historical precedent for challenging this system. We talked, we've talked a lot with, different scholars about times when, during Lincoln's, when Lincoln was president. Do you think that the Supreme Court was very happy with Lincoln's attempts to end slavery? They were a bunch of right-wing pro-slavery freaks. And you know what Lincoln says? Thank you very much for your legal advice, Supreme Court. We're going to do it anyway, right? The point is that there have been moments in American history where the legislative and the executive branch have said no to the Supreme Court. And I think by far we have entered into that time today. Let us not forget that the Supreme Court now, the justices who are going to be ruling on this, are people who were elected, who were put into their position, they're not elected, appointed to their position by presidents who lost the popular vote. I mean, where is the democracy in that system? Non-existent. This is a piece by Matt Karp. Highly suggest people read this, how Abraham Lincoln fought the Supreme Court. But let's also remember that it's not just like the ghosts of fucking old presidents like Bush and Trump that threaten us. It's people who aren't even American. If you could pull up this piece in Jezebel here. In the leaked abortion decision, Justice Alito relies on jurists who supported marital rape and executed witches. So heavily cited in this piece here, in the opinion, were the legal musings of a 17th century British citizen um, who argued that women who are married cannot bring claims of rape to the state. And I'm going to quote from this real quick. This is from this guy. For the husband cannot be guilty of a rape committed by himself upon his lawful wife, for by their mutual matrimonial consent and contract the wife hath given up herself in this kind unto her husband, which she cannot retract. I mean, that is the most reactionary, dehumanizing thing you can ever say. What kind of fucking democracy is this? Where we're going to let some feudal ass motherfucker be able to take away human rights today for people? I mean, this is a clown show to sit here and act like this is that this is just or reasonable or society based on laws. This is a clown show. This is people who, because they understand that they have the numbers in this unelected body, that they can do whatever they want, and they love to nitpick and find like, oh well, some fucking fancy lad from 16th century Britain said some things that sort of back up my argument, right? I mean, there's no legal standing for this. I mean, is this the kind of democracy that you want to be living in, where not only do you not win if you get the popular vote, but two, we have to have foreign fucking British people from 400 years ago telling us how we should be governing our society today? It's a joke. It's not upholding the right of law. It's not a rational system. It's absolutely absurd to sit here today.
Hale is a guy, I just looked at his encyclopedia, who was a jurist during the English Civil War and managed to sort of play both sides, and it was it wasn't clear if he was supportive of the Parliament or the Royals, and sort of interesting why a guy like a Supreme Court justice like John Roberts, for instance, would be interested in. But I mean, I know this wasn't Roberts, this was Alito. But I mean, why they might be interested in a figure like that.
No, I mean totally. And like, look, it's just unbelievable. And like, people who have followed me and the work I've done here on TMBS and other places for years know that I am fervently against the Supreme Court, both in its current iteration, but on its kind of philosophical justification. I'm a big believer in democracy. I think that we should be able to decide these questions as a people, right? Yeah. And there is no reason that we should have some high body sitting on top of democracy, shutting it down everywhere we go. From Bush v. Gore to all of the horrible, horrible, dehumanizing decisions against Native Americans, against people who were forcibly enslaved, against women. The Supreme Court has never, ever, ever stood up for the justification that has been added post hoc. By the way, people love, you hear this all the time, Matt, right? Well, we like, the Supreme Court is corrupted today, but actually it's always been set up to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority. Do you know what tyranny they're talking about? Yeah. They're talking about rich people. They have never, like at every moment in American history, if you can cite a Supreme Court ruling that might, that was in our favor. Do you know where that came from? It came from massive social movements and political movements that completely changed the terrain. So the Supreme Court had no option other than to sort of follow through with what was being demanded in the streets. And you know how they do those rulings? In the most conservative way possible. Abortion is no exception to this rule. Roe v. Wade, for what it has done to ensure people's right to health care, their basic human right to health care, has been seriously helpful. Don't misunderstand me here. But it is the most conservative way to assert a basic human right and agency for women and for people over their health care, right? Yeah. The right to privacy. They find a way to make this as conservative and muddled as possible so that for the next few generations, it can be pulled away and pushed back and challenged and weakened. Right? There's never this kind of triumphant moment that these people who truly say they believe in the system, argue is coming. Beyond that, questions should begin and end in the democratic process. That means voting, that means in the legislature, and that means in the executive branch. I'd prefer much more power to reside in the legislative branch than the executive branch. There is no reason to sit and have people who have lifetime appointments, who are relics of ages past, who also are people who climbed up in a system. We can have a different conversation if you think that the American justice system is any kind of harbor of peace and justice for the people. I think most people listening to this know what I'm saying when we understand that the justice system in this country is a system that has always favored the powerful and the connected and the wealthy. So think
Yeah, I
about the
mean,
people who
just to,
rise up in it and what their positions and biases are.
I mean, look at the outcomes. Massive inequality and number one cager of human beings on the planet. There's your judiciary.
No, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's let me just okay, well, what has to be done about it? I think, and I hope, from everything that we've experienced in our lifetime, Matt, and especially over the past few years, that people should start getting sick and tired of debating and hoping that 9 unelected, strange people rule in our favor. That people will start to recognize the court for what it is, a relic of the past, a relic of anti democratic power, and start to understand. And it's not just anti democratic, too, I have to note. In the sense of it ruling against, things like judicial review or deciding who gets to be president, based upon who their favorite boy is, as we saw in Bush v. Gore. It's also anti-democratic because it puts an absurd weight over every question of democracy in every presidential election. Every single time I voted for president in my lifetime, the first thing that people say is like, well, you might not like the Democratic candidate, but you know what will happen if the Republicans come in? They will put in a right-wing justice, and then the whole train is going to shut down. The whole system can fall and cave upon itself. That's an absurd way to run a country. That's an absurd way to run a country of 300 plus million people. That if something happens once every 4 years and a bunch of people in the Democratic Party who decide that they want to help push up the appeal of somebody named Donald Trump ends up backfiring on them and they win, that we're now sitting here in 2022 losing rights that have been basically the rule of law in this country for 60 years. It's absolutely an absurd system, and it's an realistic question to ask of the people. What we have to be doing is to be building political movements that not only can win, so we're not getting into the system where like reactionary judges are being put into power, but to a system that is willing and articulate about the fact that the branch of government that is closest to the people, and that is the legislative branch, needs to be able to have authority and to challenge and to pull back the authority of the Supreme Court. People like Packin, right? I prefer nullifying the general power of them, at least at the heights, the national heights of government. And if Packin maybe leads to people losing confidence in the court, right, as and recognizing as what it is, a political institution, that would be good. But I would prefer just a much more direct, one for one. This is an anti-democratic organization. And look, I know it seems far-fetched right now. I know there's a lot of things on the table, but this is absolutely this is one of the most important questions that you have in politics if you want to change this system, is to be able to challenge the power of the court. We're not even talking about revolutionary socialism or anything at this point. Bernie Sanders, can you imagine what they would have done to something very milquetoast, very legal, and very cool, like Medicare for all, if Bernie Sanders was elected president? They would have cut that shit up. And until we recognize it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of education and a lot of organizing to do it. But until we recognize that challenging this authority of this unelected body is absolutely paramount to doing anything in this country, we will never succeed.
And if you look back in history, like when things like civil rights were passed, this sort of talk was on the table. Like
yes.
The reason, like LBJ, interestingly, like gave the Senate a new lease on life, because prior to him navigating that stuff in the wake of JFK getting his head blown off, people were looking at the Senate and the Supreme Court in exactly those terms. In that, like this is a relic. It has outgrown not only our needs, but like any sort of modern government's needs. And people are like saying, well, what would you do? Like, I mean, generally, I feel like the general leftist position should be like unicameral legislatures that have supremacy over a judiciary. Like I think that's there you go. Like
No,
if
the
it, if it
Supreme.
gets if it goes around if it bounces around courts enough, then it becomes a voting issue.
Man, I mean, the amount of power that the Supreme Court in the United States has is unparalleled to any of the other countries that we typically compare the United States to. It is a unique thing. And you have to have trust in the people if you are a socialist or a leftist. And you can never sit here on your hands and say, like, well, maybe we'll have some progressive guys in the Supreme Court. So if the right gets power, they won't be able to do anything. Because what ends up happening is the right ends up having power over those kind of institutions because they are inherently, by their very nature, conservative. Um, and it is very false to sit here and look at American history and not recognize that the court has always played a conservative and tamping down role. Um,
Yeah.
but beyond that, I mean, let me just end here, right? First up, for all of the people who are frightened and fearful, we're here with y'all. I don't have the direct answers other than putting the pressure up as much as we can on this. We've been here before. Remember that, when this came into play, when Roe v. Wade happened, it came not because of the benevolence of the court, but because there was a massive, sustained, brave movement of people who stood up for basic human rights. That's how we've got this victory in the first place, and that's how we'll get it again in the future. The second group, especially for what I was just saying about the Supreme Court, your criticism cannot condemn you to nihilism. That is how our opponents win. We cannot accept their framing, and we cannot accept the shitty way that things are run today. You can look at the history of this country and you could say, well, America has never really been a democracy, David. What are you going on about? We need to restore democracy. We need to fight for democracy. Your answer has to be then, if that's your analysis, to change it into one. Not to say, well, things have been bad, so I'm going to accept the thesis of the ruling class. No greater good could come for the ruling class than if the left just lockstep accepts this kind of anti-democratic nature of the American state.
Yeah.
For too many people, and I've talked about this a lot, a video I did a while ago for TMBS on what I call left pessimism. For too many people, like this, the realization that this system severely limits democracy, if it's what we're seeing this week, if it's what happened to Bernie Sanders, if it's what happened when they pulled away the popular vote from, the very, very vapid but winner of the presidential election in 2000, Gore. If you come to this realization that this system is severely limited, that's where too many people's analysis ends. They say this system's corrupt, this system's broken, and that's it. You can't do that. You cannot do that. You have to fight for, you have to argue for, and build up people's power so that we can live in that democracy then.
Right.
And, making the point, even though it's not been the case that we've lived in this beautiful, thriving democracy throughout our history, making the point that the promise that motivates people of living in a democratic society is being denied by things like the Supreme Court is absolutely important if we want to build up a kind of system that will work better for people. You cannot fall into this trap of nihilism. You cannot fall into this trap of a pessimistic realism. You have to be willing to fight. That's the only way that things have ever changed for the better.